Truths and a Lie. This is the If Something Seems to Be Too Good to Be True edition. And we're back this week after a hiatus last week because I was at BlogHer for 2 days midweek. For a nanosecond, we thought about recording it live from the Creators Summit, but it was just too crazy and too loud. It was my 14th BlogHer, not counting the food and business conferences, just this main summer event. The format was a bit different than the past, with most of the action on the main stage, but some of the highlights were Christy Turlington-Burns and Kirsten Gillibrand talking about maternal health and the need to vote. P&G executive Shelley McNamara talked about her experience as an out gay executive in corporate America. Mattel showed their new career Barbies, and I'm going to show them just a couple of them to you. Hold on. Mattel gave out their new career Barbies, and we have robot engineer, and we have scientist, and they also had a couple others that were pretty cool, but I was particularly excited about the robot engineer. And I was lucky to meet the Voice of the Year honoree, Dr. Alama Rabit, who is a UN commissioner and just an amazing woman. But we're back. We're back to talk about fraud, because it's very much been in the digital media news. Instagram fraud had the headlines a few weeks ago. Last week, there was an expose in the New York Times about YouTube fraud. And I've been reading about concerns from advertisers about GDPR fraud in the form of false consent strings. It's very much been in the digital media news. Instagram fraud. I think you just turned on your sound, Greg.
Oh, yeah, no, sorry. I was trying to get the link here.
So anyway, the truth number one is that, if it seems too good to be true, it probably isn't true. And we need to think about and look at all of those different platforms and different things in terms of, what are we buying into if we are, believing all these big claims? What do you think, Greg?
I think everyone knows, if you've grown up at all, that you should be dubious of anything that sounds too good to be true. I think especially in social and in things community is the one thing that you cannot build fast. Right, it takes time to relationships don't scale, yeah. Right? And so platforms are not built in a day, right? And I think that if you are expecting something meaningful to come out of something, you should expect that it requires an investment of your time and your energy and your resources.
So when someone offers you thousands and millions of impressions or thousands and millions of likes and shares, yeah. You need to sort of look more carefully. I mean, I think we talk a lot about this, that it's about relationships, not about, necessarily counting clicks. But the thing that concerned me as much as sort of, the YouTube, the Instagram stuff, because fraud is clearly something we have to be concerned about. But the idea of fraud exposing brands to fines for the global data protection regulations, because apparently there's, some spoofing going on about consent strings and actually people having consent. And while that's not necessarily a problem here in the US as much as it is in Europe, I think that everyone should be paying attention to, do they really have permission for this first party data or this third party data that they're being shown that a publisher or a brand is relying on the fact that if they buy that ad impression that says we have this permission, they actually do have that permission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you have to directly articulate that stuff. You can't really trust somebody else to provide that kind of assurance to you.
Which is why again, influencer marketing and social is probably the resource that a lot of people are turning to, because impressions, ad impressions, that kind of scale is more easily, I think, it's more easily detectable as fraud, but it's more easily to have fraud. And it's easier and easier for the bad guys to create fake accounts, but it's getting easier and easier for us, both by machines and by humans, to actually detect fake accounts in social. So the ability to be fraudulent in social, I think, is going to be a lot harder than potentially it is in straight up regular advertising.
I think it may be.
Go ahead.
Give the tour.
Oh, the tour of the backyard?
Yeah. Keep going.
So anyway, that was one. If you're buying something, whether it be Instagram.
You were literally like, I hope it doesn't start raining, and then I think it just started to drizzle.
Yeah. I looked like it was going to rain. Whether you're buying Instagram programs or ads or whatever it might be, looking at engagements instead of reach starts to counteract the fraudsters, because engagements are a little bit harder to mimic, although not impossible. Artificial intelligence is getting better and better at understanding whether a comment or something is actually a real human being saying it. So, they're easier to tell, but, don't buy into something just because it looks great and big and not realize that there is potentially fraud in there. But don't get so hung up on the fake followers that you don't actually continue to focus on engagements. Because I think that's one of the things I've been seeing a lot of, brands and companies saying, tell us how many fake followers this person has. And the fact of the matter is that there may not be fake followers. They could be just inactive followers. And everybody who's creating these tools to figure out how many fake followers someone has, it's all using their own decisions about what's important. There's no standard, whereas there is a standard for engagements, right? Engagements has a pretty good standard. It still can be gamed, but likes, comments, and if there's a sharing capacity on a platform, shares, divided by the number of people. Engagement rate is pretty consistent, and you can calculate it across almost anything you do. So instead of getting too hung up on the fraud, realize it's there, really focus on engagement.
When I think you make a really good point, because even the platforms don't know how to tell the fake people from the real people, so, like they're constantly still trying to purge more and more people. So I definitely agree. Like, I think it's kind of fool's gold to try and sort of think about like, well, I know how to eliminate the followers the best or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I looked at two different, and I won't name them, but I looked at two different systems this week, two different platforms that claim to be able to tell you about your fake followers, and they gave completely different answers. Right? for the same exact person, right? So clearly they're just using their own decision about what constitutes a fake follower. And you can believe, if you believe their methodology, you can go for it, but there is no universal standard. And so I'm sort of back to the point of, if you're curious about how many fake followers or how many suspicious followers, I think is a better way of talking about it, someone might have, by all means, look into one of these systems. But remember that the next guy is going to calculate it based on a different metric. And so it isn't necessarily real. Engagements, however, are at least quasi-standardized, right? I mean, you can still game that shit. Oh, excuse me. But it's a lot harder to game that than it is this fake follower thing. So
when it definitely seems like the right time to ultimately change your diet, right? Stop consuming sort of those empty calories of follower count, right? And switch to something more fulfilling.
Well, and if you are actually someone who's doing influencer marketing as an influencer, start paying more attention to who's following you, right? I mean, I don't have big followers on Instagram by choice, but I'm pruning that all the time because, I don't need the fake account, the pants manufacturer who's trying to sell online, or the, anything, but he doesn't have a real picture on Instagram, probably isn't a real person. Think about that. Because Instagram is a visual platform. So the other news that we wanted to talk about again was, because we talked about it a couple weeks ago, but the platforms are finally taking action against hate. And this is the truth. I mean, they are at long last taking action against things like Alex Jones. Apple removed it from its podcast. Spotify, Facebook, and YouTube took action, removing content, deactivating accounts. But there's still a lot of inconsistency within the platforms about what they do and what they don't do, depending on the thing. And Twitter, of course, did nothing. And the truth is that while we should be grateful for less Alex Jones on the internet, we need to hold the platforms accountable to do more. I mean, they can't, like, on one side remove the accounts and on the other side be doing something that supports him and allows him or his to continue to espouse their hate. So, because I mean, any action is good, but they got to do more.
Yeah, I was just actually reading an article was actually saying that consumers actually expect more, hold brands to a higher standard than like politicians or anyone else. It was over on a Marketing Dive. They're saying that 86% of surveyed consumers think transparency from businesses is more important than ever. And I think this is true for these platforms. I think it's true for what we expect of the companies we do business with. So I think there's a lot of these things that are actually all at play and all blended together at the same time right now.
Yeah, Pew actually recently did some research along the same lines, right? And found that relatively few Americans trust major technology companies to do what's right. And more than
Hmm.
half of them think that they should be regulated more than they are currently. Now the specter of regulation, if nothing else, ought to drive some of these companies to do things better. But as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we have to sort of balance that because when they do things better, even if they don't want to do it, they do it grudgingly.
Yeah.
The markets are punishing them. So, how does a company navigate this balance? I don't know the answer. I'm actually starting a research project for the Society for New Communications Research to get some at least understanding about what people's attitudes are about this, because we can't at one hand say we don't trust you, so please do something, and then on the other hand we actually punish their stock price when they do something, because that means the cost of doing something isn't just whatever cost it was to execute on it. It's actually loss of market value. And so they're having trouble figuring that out. I don't know what the truth is, but I do think that we have to sort of figure out that balance a little bit better than we are right now.
I guess the other thing is, I'm a little surprised, or I feel like we all have a responsibility in this process as well. I feel like it's easy for all of us to say, oh, it's so easy to solve, right? Without necessarily thinking through. And I don't know the right medium or format or place to do that, but it does feel like if people were to actually be discussing how they would want to fix these problems, like some of those problems might become real solutions.
Fair enough. So our myth today is that bots and meme accounts can replace authentic influencer content. Greg found an article that I thought was pretty interesting a few weeks ago about how in the UK, it was mostly UK-based information, but
Yeah.
that people are starting to use meme accounts to replace influence interaction because it's easier to control, it's easier to manage, blah, 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 blah. And, that's true enough, but they aren't a good alternative to actually connecting with your customers, right? 1,000 times no.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, again, you can't build a relationship per se, at least not today, with some autonomous sort of AI or bot or something else that may be out there.
Right, and they're not truly your customers. So it's not that they're not a good strategy or a possible addition to your strategy, but if you think they can actually replace connecting with your customers on social media more
Yeah.
actively and not just relying on reshares, then you're sort of missing a big component of what makes influencer marketing so successful. I mean, one of the stats they quoted, which was interesting, was that engagement rate for fashion meme accounts was 3.5%, which was better than their average of general
Right.
accounts. But influencers in general are more effective at it's not huge numbers, but than the sponsored meme posts in other kinds of areas. So it may be that we trust or like the memes when it comes to things that are sort of more about the external parts of us. But when we talk about sort of engaging on, deeper conversation, maybe that's where influencers become the better choice for you. And it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So anyway, the myth would be, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think in those meme accounts as well, like it's still sort of a cop out, right? It's the lowest form of value you can offer, right? So, of course, brands are hustling their way over to there because it's easier and scalable and gives them kind of the metrics and KPIs and fulfillment that they kind of constantly validate themselves with.
But it's not, and again, and I also think that the other thing that sort of troubles me as a human being is that bot accounts are fine, particularly if it's a chat bot for support and stuff like that. I mean, I think we all sort of understand that we're not probably talking to a real human being when we click on that little, do you want to chat now? At least if you're, using the internet or using technology at any degree of often. But we ought to be honest with people if they are actually engaging with bots. I don't have any problem, especially the younger generations. They're going to be much more open to that because they're so used to engaging with avatars. So the fact is that, what's the difference between an avatar and a bot? Not really so much, but at least they should know. You should know whether there's a real person behind that or you're engaging with a construct, because I don't know that they'll care. I don't know that I care. But at least if you know, you can at least judge it.
You advocate that being overt, like as a session starts, this is an automated system, or
I don't know. I mean, I think with chatbots and support, I think there's a sort of an understanding already that they are, right? We sort of know that just by the tenor and tone of the way they answer the questions, because half the time they're sort of kind of right, but not quite right. So you can tell the difference between a real person and most people, I think, are fairly sensitive to, if they ask a question and the answer they get is like only 35% there, they probably understand that they're getting an answer from an automated system. I think people are smarter than we often give them credit for. But I think when it comes to whether it's these Instagram accounts or video accounts or anything where it's an avatar or something that sort of approaches looking like a real human being, I honestly think we should be honest with folks that this is a construct. And I don't know the form it takes, but I think that if we want AI to actually be our partner and our servant, not our master, we actually need to use that kind of thing very, very cautiously and very carefully, because otherwise we end up, the real in things goes away, and I'm such a big believer in the real.
Yeah, I hear you on that.
So here's our, just to recap it to make it easier for the editor. Our truth number one was that if it seems too good to be true, it probably isn't, and you need to look at what you're buying and what you're using, and focus more on engagements and less on sort of those big reach numbers. It's not that reach isn't important. It's just you should be using reach as a delivery metric, not as a result. And the result is what actually happens. Truth number two is that we have to hold the platforms accountable, and across the board, we need to figure out a way to do that and have them be incentivized to do the right thing, not just penalized for doing the right thing. And that's really why I think a lot of them are, not doing it as quickly as possible, because they know that if they spend too much money making things better, that they're going to get hit in the markets. And then lastly, fake people can't replace real people no matter what, whether it's memes or bots or fake followers. If you're actually saying, I'm making it an endeavor to engage with my community through influencer marketing, you need to be engaging with real people, and because they're your customers, and everything else is just marketing tactic. Not bad, just not the same thing.
Yeah, I think the bow around all of these, that the relationships are powerful things, but they take time.
Absolutely. So that is Two Truths and a Lie for this Friday, August 17th. We hope that everyone who watches this, whether it's live or later on, enjoys it. Please leave comments. Please find us on Facebook at my page, Susan Getgood, or over on Alpha Thoughts, which is the page that Greg maintains on LinkedIn, which will have a version of this at some point. And have a great weekend, everybody. If you're on the East Coast, stay cool. Take care, all.
Bye, everyone.